Here to kick off our Restoration Around the World series, we welcome Superintendent for the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, Sarah Fangman. Sarah will be telling us about Mission Iconic Reefs, which is one of the largest investments in reef restoration anywhere in the world, and that will be taking place right here in our backyard of the Florida Keys.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Mission Iconic Reef project. This is an effort that we have undertaken to recover several of the coral reefs in the Florida Keys. As most of you know, coral reefs in the Florida Keys have historically been some of the world's most iconic reefs. These are reefs that are recognized as being rich, diverse, colorful, full of life, and really valued all over the world. Here in the Keys, we really cherish our marine environment. We are intimately connected with the waters that surround these islands. They are beautiful, they are a part of our life, part of our culture, and something that is really, really valuable to this community. Of course, because we love to recreate on the reefs, but also because they provide important habitat to resources that we depend upon. Fisheries resources, of course, lobster, a lot of different organisms live in those reefs, and that's really very important to create this rich ecosystem. But importantly, these reefs also provide storm protection. And for those of us that live on these tiny little low-lying islands, that's very, very important because they really provide a break for the waves that are coming from offshore. Now, I am sure that most of you listening know that reefs in the Florida Keys, and for that matter, reefs all around the world, have suffered considerably over the last several decades due to a variety of threats. These include bleaching from temperature stress, storm events, of course, recently Hurricane Irma, and then right now, the reefs in the Florida Reef Tract are suffering from a really massive coral disease event that is taking a heavy, heavy toll on our reef ecosystem. As I mentioned, these reefs are incredibly important to our community, and so we believe we cannot afford to let these declines continue, and we must take bold and strategic action to turn around these declines, to reverse that trend, and to help those corals recover. Now, some of you may be asking yourselves, well, hurricanes aren't going away. Temperature stress still exists. As far as I've heard, the disease is still out there. How can you do restoration when you've got these challenges still existing and still impacting the reef system? And that's a very fair and valid question. How can we take on restoration when those threats continue? Well, our answer is, number one, we have to. We can't afford to wait. But number two, we can do that restoration, ambitious restoration, while doing it smart. We can do it in a very strategic way using corals that are resilient, because as I noted, there are still corals out there. There's certainly been decline, but the corals that are out there are resilient. They're strong. Using their offspring, using their genetic material, we can conduct restoration. We can also conduct restoration with corals that are not susceptible to some of the threats that we're experiencing, like the coral disease. So, furthermore, we must undertake ambitious coral restoration because natural recovery cannot happen fast enough. So, yes, we have conditions that continue to cause stress on our reef systems. We must address those. We must address water quality issues. We must try to do what we can to address some of the other threats that these resources are facing. But we cannot just hope that while we do that, natural recovery will bring these reef system backs. It's not going to happen fast enough. And in some cases, it won't happen at all because some of these species are so far apart the individuals of the species are so far apart that they cannot naturally recover. So we must get out and help this system. The good news is, like the great news is that here in the Florida Keys, restoration really got its start globally about 15 years ago. And so a lot has been learned. The Coral Restoration Foundation was really on the forefront of this, helping to pioneer restoration efforts that have since been exported all around the world to other reef systems that were also experiencing declines. People all around the world continue to use these techniques, learn more about better ways to do it, and now we're importing some of those lessons. So it's really become something that is very exciting, lots of opportunity and lots of progress. And the work that has been done here in the Florida Keys has truly been heroic. There has been a tremendous amount of effort undertaken to date. And it has been successful to a certain degree, but unfortunately it hasn't, at the scale we've been doing it, been able to keep up with the decline. The efforts have been amazing, and we've learned a tremendous amount about how to do this, but we need to scale it up. We need to step up and really take on more effort. And we're saying that because obviously the declines are serious, but we've also been hearing from the community and community leaders. In the photograph on the left, you see Senator Marco Rubio, who was recently in the Keys, asking tough questions about what do we plan to do to address these declines. And we're hearing from young people. The photograph on the left is an image of a young diver who in her short career reports seeing the declines on these reefs just over the course of a couple of years. And so the community is telling us they want to see action, they want to see a solution. And so clearly it was time for us to develop a comprehensive strategy to change the trajectory of these reef declines and develop a really ambitious course that will bring us in the other direction. And so we brought together a host of organizations. The Coral Restoration Foundation is central to that effort. You can see the other organizations working on this effort to develop a strategy to restore a collection of reefs in the Florida Keys and indeed turn that story around. And so we identified 7 specific reefs that we want to focus on over the next couple of decades to recover these reefs. And we selected reefs that are throughout the Florida Keys. We selected reefs that are both inshore and offshore. We selected reefs that had historically high coral cover and healthy and diverse reef ecosystems. We selected sites where some restoration effort has taken place and we feel confident we can have success with additional effort. And so these are the 7 sites that are a part of the Mission Iconic Reef Project. Now, what's different about the restoration plan that we are undertaking here? Well, it, as I mentioned before, stands on the shoulders of the efforts done to date and takes it a little bit further. And I'll use a gardening analogy. In the same way that when you're going to work on your garden at home, you don't just put the plants out there and forget about them. Typically, you might, take care of the soil and do a little site preparation. Then you do the planting, but you don't just walk away. You then you go back to your garden. You might remove the predators, some bugs, the worms, whatever you need. You're tweaking that system to make sure that it is healthy. You're maintaining it, you're pulling weeds, you're watering, and then you're keeping an eye on it and adjusting. In the same way that you would do that in your garden, we plan to do that with these 7 iconic sites. So it's not go out, plant and forget. We're going to go out and maintain them, working with hopefully community members who can help us do the monitoring of these places, doing some stewardship so that we can really make sure that these 7 sites are successful. So Before we got started with this process, we did a lot of planning. And that involved looking at, once we had selected these 7 sites, looking at each of them in high detail. What you see here is one of the 7 sites, Sombrero Reef. And you're looking at a map that distinguishes different parts of that single reef. So a reef is not all created equal. There are different zones within a single reef. And in those different zones, you would expect to see, in a natural, healthy setting, different corals that would be living on different parts of the reef. And so what we needed to do when thinking about how are we going to restore these different sites, we needed to understand very closely what would naturally be there. And so we mapped these out, and then after mapping them using tools like this remote sensing, aerial survey work, we then went and ground truthed them, meaning we put divers in the water to confirm our mapping so that we could identify the different amount of habitat in those different zone types. So what you see in the bottom right of this slide is the 5 different zone types at Sombrero Reef and the rough area of each of those. Now, why do we need that information? Well, as I noted, different parts of the reef, different things live there. And so when we knew how much, for example, of Sombrero Reef is shallow reef crust, we then could calculate, okay, we would normally expect elkhorn coral to live there. So we're going to try to get elkhorn coral at about 11% of that available habitat to be growing on, 11% of it. Okay, so then we could calculate how much of the different habitats require different species of coral. So we would know what we need to grow and propagate so we can outplant them. Because again, not every part of the reef is created equal. And you have to be very smart about what you plant where if you want it to succeed. Because certain species will not thrive on certain parts of the reef. Now, these reefs, as I had noted, have been in decline like corals around the world for decades. So we are not going to be able to restore 50 years of decline in 5 years. So what we have is a plan that takes us out. Currently, we're putting it, estimating, 2035, as you can see on this slide. And we have broken this project into different phases. What you can see on the far left, starting in 2019, when we began this project, we estimated these 7 sites coral cover was down to 2%, around 2%. And ultimately, you can see on the far right of this slide, we hope to get to a 25% coral cover. So that's pretty significant. And as you can see, we've kind of broken this down into different phases as to how we go about reaching that goal. Starting right away with the corals species that are not susceptible to the current disease outbreak, and that organizations like the Coral Restoration Foundation are very, very good at doing. So elkhorn, staghorn corals, we can do a lot of that restoration. We've already got the skills, the abilities to do that, and we just have to increase the amount of work that we're doing there. Simultaneously, we're going to be doing research to increase our capacity to add different coral species to some of these efforts, as well as some of the grazers, such as urchin, that are needed to help maintain a healthy coral system. So we've got a lot of simultaneous work going, but you can see basically we've mapped this out to give us different phases to get us to that ultimate goal of 25% coral cover at these iconic reef sites. There's a lot of information on this slide, but I think what I want you to take away from this is that for each of these sites, we calculated using that mapping process, the amount of area that we anticipate could be restored at each of the reefs, the number of corals that would require, and that allowed us to do an estimate of what kind of quantity of corals would need to be added, quantity of grazers that would need to be added to achieve our goals. What you can see, I'll call your attention to the fact that there's a lot of variety in these 7 iconic sites. You'll see the top reef listed, Carey's Fort Reef, restorable areas over 125,000 square meters. That's very, very large, very ambitious. Down in the lower Keys, our smallest restoration site, Newfound Harbor, is just a little over 8,000 square meters. So you can see that the scale of these restoration efforts are considerably different. That reflects our interest in getting a variety of habitat types and reef types in this iconic reef mission. Doing that allowed us to estimate cost. So that's always the question everybody wants to know, well, what's it gonna cost? And you can see in the center of that circle, a big 97 million, just under $100 million. This is for phase 1. As you can see, the cost of the different reefs varies considerably, not surprisingly, based on the size of area we're trying to restore. What I will say about this, $97 million is a very, very large number. I acknowledge that. But I will also offer that restoration that we're doing in other areas not so very far away from these reefs, for example, in South Florida, in the Everglades, an area that desperately needs restoration, that restoration there will benefit the reefs because it will help with water quality issues that we're dealing with. That said, $97 million is a much smaller investment than what we're making in restoring the Everglades. So we do, as a nation, as a community, value these ecosystems, recognize their importance, and invest in them. We're doing it just north of these reefs. We need to do it on these reefs. The value of these reefs is much, much higher than $97 million. So this is an investment that we need to make. And we're doing that not just to make a museum. So these places are not going to be restored and people will be kept away. We want to invite people to help us recover these reefs and also enjoy them. We hope to recover significant areas. You can see the statistics in the middle of the slide, but our intention is to engage people in this process to get us to help us, and then so that they can continue to enjoy these iconic reefs. So that once again, these 7 sites can be the story of how a coral reef can indeed be successfully recovered. And so these Florida reefs can once again become some of the world's most iconic. So I hope that gives you a little bit of information about this mission. I look forward to getting some of you involved in helping us do this work. And a huge thank you to the Coral Restoration Foundation for their leadership and all of the work they've been doing and the work that they will be doing to help us make this succeed. Thank you.